Hello everyone. This is part 2 of the heart lecture. So in the first part, we went over the function of the heart here, and then we covered the layers, pericardium, the parietal and visceral, the epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. We looked at the intercalated discs and where the heart is located in the body. We also covered the interatrial septum, interventricular septum, and then the fetal circulation. And then we went over the valves of the heart. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over the electrical system of the heart. So how does the heart coordinate, basically? And let me see here. So that's what we're going to do next, and this is called ECG or EKG. So how does the heart coordinate its beating, what the order is, which chambers are going to contract, and then some diseases of the heart and so forth. So let's see. So the heart conduction system is measured using this thing called EKG or ECG. So it creates this trace that we see here on the chart here, creates that chart. And ECG stands for electrocardiogram. And then you might be wondering why it's also called EKG. So that's coming from German spelling. German spelling of cardio is with K, and that's where it comes from. But we still use it because some people try to switch it over to ECG. But then ECG also sounds like encephalogram, which is for the head. So it can get confusing. So that's why people still call it EKG. So in the previous years, technology got to the point where we would do this and put the leads on a patient. They would put these leads on a patient, and then this machine would spit out this graph, and they'll pick up the leads would pick up the electrical signals, electrochemical signals coming from the heart, and those would be connected to the machine, and then this graph was printed. You get a needle that's going to pick up the vibrations of the earthquake, so something like that. So it's going to go ahead and trace the electrical chemical signals coming from the heart, and the trace is very characteristic shape. If it has a good shape, that means you're healthy. If any of these parts were off, whatever they were expecting, then the EKG is off. And the cardiologist can tell you where you might have trouble in the heart, and then you go from there and they try to repair it. So now we don't use these pieces of paper. It just goes directly to the computer and then goes into a file. So on the other end, the cardiologist just opens up the file, takes a look at it, and then they can make the diagnosis. So the way it works is you go in there, the technician will hook you up, and then let you go for 15 to 20 minutes to create a base reading, and then the cardiologist will read it and then talk about it. So let's learn all the components of it. So first thing we have to understand is the heart muscle beats by itself. So it's going to have cells that you have in the heart, they beat independently of your nervous system. So even if you don't tell it what to do, it's just going to start contracting. And we know this because you can take stem cells and grow them in the lab on a petri dish. In the very beginning, the stem cells, they're dividing, they're not doing much. But at a certain point, they're just going to spontaneously start beating. So just because you're beating doesn't mean that you're going to accomplish anything. For example, you have all these cells, and what one cell does, um, another cell, might not be doing the same thing. So, but for this one, it has to be in sync. It's an algorithm. So, for example, if the way it works, it's step-by-step process. If the atria don't contract, the ventricles might not contract. So, to coordinate all this, it's we have something called a pacemaker. The pacemaker cells, everybody have those, and they contract. They all contract, and then the pacemaker decides, okay, every time I do this, you contract, and then I want you to, maybe you start running, and then your heart the pacemaker kind of tells your heart that I need you to speed up now. And then the heart starts to speed up. So they contract and contract and contract. So that's what the pacemaker is. It's kind of setting the pace. We have a natural pacemaker, and it's going to be called sinoatrial node. So the healthy person, there is going to be something called sinoatrial node. That's their pacemaker. And here it's in the right atrium, and it's not nervous tissue, it's actually muscle. So the muscle is special. Muscle is going to determine the pace in which the muscle is going to contract in the heart. And just because it's not nervous tissue doesn't mean the nervous system is not involved. Obviously, your brain and your spinal cord are sending nerves over here, and they're going to tell the sinoatrial node what to do, and that's controlled by your brain, the spinal cord. But in absence of any information from the central nervous system, it'll just be on its own. And the beginning of the SA node will determine the pace. And the next thing that's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and send a signal. So this is the SA node, and it's going to send a signal in this direction. And that signal is going to reach the AV node. And we talked about the cells that are, how they're connected, they're gap junctions and in the intercalated disc. So these signals, they get sent through the gap junctions and then they spread. So here, so you have your SA node here, and it's going to send the signal and it's going to go down. The signal goes down, and then this makes the right atrium and then the left atrium contract, and then the signal is going to reach the AV node. So it's going to spread through the walls of the atria, then it's going to go ahead and spread through the walls of left atrium, and then it'll cause the two atria to contract. The SA node is going to give a signal basically to the two atria to contract, and then the blood is going to get pumped down to the next chamber, which are ventricles. So it's going to push the blood down to the next chamber. So that's step one. And then the SA node is going to, and once that contracts, the next thing that's going to happen is the signal will go down to the AV node. That's the second step. And once it goes to the AV node, because you need a little bit time to fill the blood, there needs to be a split second of no contraction. So that's where the first P wave is coming from the atria contraction. And then this is basically AV node pauses for a split second because it's refilling, and then it sends the signal. So the P wave, the green part here is called the P wave, and that's because this part is showing kind of green arrows here. So that's what it's equivalent to. And when it's contracting, it creates a little bump, and that's called the P wave. And I don't know the origin of P and the QRS and so forth, so just memorize that. So that's the first contraction. And then it just sits there for a split second, and you have AV node pausing, and that's flat because you're waiting for the chambers to fill. And then it's going to sit there, and it's going to be the AV node. And if you haven't figured out yet what AV node stands for, it stands for atrioventricular node. So AV node means it's AV node. It's called that because between the atrium and also the ventricle. So it's going to be between the atrium and the ventricle. And the sinoatrial node sends the signal that reaches the AV node. And after that pause, what's going to happen is it's going to send the signal down. So you have these fibers sending the signal down. And that's where this QRS wave is coming from. And this system here is called the Purkinje system. So His Purkinje system, and bundle of His. Maybe you heard about that. So we'll just call it the braking system or the Purkinje system. And it's named after the researcher who discovered it. So it's going to take the signal into the myocardium. That's the myocardium. And what's going to myocardium of the ventricles, and they're going to cause the ventricles to give a really big contraction. And because the ventricles are larger than the atria, they'll generate much bigger contraction. And that's what's going to make this QRS. I said that before. So that's going to make this QRS bump there. And QRS complex is really big contraction, and what causes the right atrium to send the blood to the lungs, and then the left atrium to send blood to the systemic system. I meant the ventricle. So that's what's over there. And then the ventricles relax, and then you get this signal that everything's going to relax. In order for that, you have this T wave. So once the ventricles squeeze, this ventricle sends the blood to the pulmonary, and then this ventricle is going to send it to the whole body. Okay. So this is what it looks like with an image of the heart superimposed with the trace. So over here on number 1, we have the signal originating from the SA node, and it's going to go ahead and give this first bump right here. So the bump happens, and once the signal spreads, you're getting that bump. Signal is spreading, and the atria is contracting. Then it's going to pause for a split second, and now the signal has reached the AV node. The AV node is causing the ventricles to contract, and that's where the QRS complex is coming from. And now the ventricles have contracted, and now they're going to kind of relax, and that's where this last bump is coming from. So it's a mild bump where everything relaxes. So if I'm going too fast for you, this is the image that your book has. So this is just another way of showing it. And this is a video. You can pause it. You can maybe rewind it, whatever you need to do. So I'm just gonna continue. So we don't need to know the timing for this. Maybe in physiology they'll ask you to do that. So this is showing the time, but for anatomy you don't need to know the time, but you do need to know what's happening in the conduction system. So for the time, it's there because it takes some time for blood to fill, and that's the reason why it's there. But again, if I went too fast, I put it in writing for you. And this is on Canvas if you want to print it out, or you can pause the video and write this down in your notes if you want to. So anyway, so SA node originates the signal, starts the signal. The SA node causes the atria to contract, and then it goes to the AV node. And the AV node is where it lays flat for the blood to fill, and then it goes and go to the ventricles, causes them to contract, and then finally you have the ventricles relaxation of the ventricles, and the whole thing repeats until you die. So you can go ahead and pause this, write this down in your notes, or you can print this off from Canvas. So that's the conduction system, and I want you to remember the name because we're going to cover something later, and some students get confused between the conduction system and something that we're going to cover at the end of this lecture. So I'll remind you again of this. Okay, now what we know is what's causing the contractions. So let's go back to the blood flow. We said that you start off with this big tube called the superior vena cava. That's going to send the blue blood. We have superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So vena cava is going to send the blue blood, and that's the deoxygenated blood. And after the muscles have used up all oxygen, it's blue. It goes into the right atrium, and it goes past the tricuspid valve, then goes to the right ventricle, and then it goes into the pulmonary valve, and then the pulmonary trunk, and then pulmonary trunk takes it to the pulmonary arteries. So the arteries is going away from the heart. So the lungs is purple here because the blue blood is mixing with oxygen. The mixing with oxygen happens, and that's why it's purple until it picks up all the oxygen. Then it's gonna go and turn bright red. Technically it doesn't, but that's what your textbook is showing. It's color coded, and then it's oxygenated blood. Now it goes back to the left atrium, and then it goes to the mitral valve, to the left ventricle, and from there it goes to the aorta through the aortic valve, and then to the rest of the body, which is the systemic circuit. Okay, so that's what it's showing. Started from coming from the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium, went through the tricuspid valve here to the right ventricle, From there, it went to the pulmonary arteries. Again, arteries are taking the blood away from the heart. So you have this pulmonary artery taking blood away from the heart, another one here. So it's blue in color because that's saying the definition of the arteries that's sending blood away. Remember the definition. It goes away from the heart, so it's an artery. But it's blue because it's deoxygenated blood, and the heart it's deoxygenated blood away from the heart going to the lungs. Then it picks up oxygen. Then it's oxygenated and it's going to be come back through the pulmonary vein here. One here, another one here. And that's why it's showing red because it's oxygenated blood now. So that's gonna go into the left atrium. Then you basically follow this and goes through the mitral valve into the ventricles, and that's gonna send it out through the aortic valve into the aorta and goes through the whole body. So that's basically what the blood flow through the heart. In the lab, I want you to get a heart model and kind of, trace this blood flow through the heart. And I learned this pretty early. So this is something you have to memorize, path of the blood through the heart. And a lot of 10-year-olds these days, know path of the blood through the heart. So this is something that you do need to memorize, and you need to be able to identify all the structures on the heart and on the model. So for the heart model, this is a pretty typical model that you see in the lab for the heart. And you're going to go ahead and start grabbing these heart models in the lab. And what I would do is take a lab tape and start to tape them and start to label them. And then, rip all of them off and then maybe try again. Tape it up again and then use it as a practice. Because we're going to be using these models to test you on the lab exam. So it's just a blood flow through the heart. I haven't even gone over the arteries yet that are going through the systemic circuit. So it might be hard to believe, but the heart itself doesn't get enough oxygen or energy just from simple diffusion. So just because you got blood inside the chambers of the heart and the atria and the ventricle, is not enough to feed the heart. So what you need to do is you need to have blood vessels that go into the myocardium, and that's going to feed the heart. And these blood vessels are going to be called the coronary arteries. They supply the blood to tissues of the heart. So they go into the thick muscle of the heart, and these famous coronary arteries, they do get clogged up, and especially if someone has a bad diet, or it can be genetic, and then they have these plaques or clots that can plug these up, and then the tiny coronary arteries, um, they get clogged up, and then what you do is the muscles, heart muscles not going to get enough oxygen, and then you can have a heart attack. So these coronary arteries, they supply the tissues of the heart itself. You need to have them open in order for your heart to stay healthy. So that's the aortic valve, and that's the right coronary artery. That's where they're going. And that's the left coronary artery. That's the aorta. So you have the aortic valve. You need to find yourself aortic valve, and then from there you can see that where the coronary arteries are found. And then you have these tiny little holes here. That's the opening of left coronary artery, and that's where it goes, and it feeds into the muscle. And the left coronary artery also feeds, the right coronary artery also feeds into the muscle. So both of them do. And these two branches of the aortic valve. So that's what's going to feed the heart, and they do need to stay open. So the path is going to the coronary arteries. You saw that it splits into right and left here, goes into the myocardium, and once it's used up all the oxygen, so that's the coronary artery going into the aortic valve. You have right and left. Right coronary artery is right here. And this is the posterior view. So it feeds into the myocardium, and then once it's used up all the oxygen, energy, and glucose and ATP, it starts to come back, and those are going to be the veins. Those are called the small cardiac vein here, another cardiac vein here. So coronary artery is taking the oxygen to the heart tissues, then comes back through the cardiac veins, and then it turns into this really big thing that's called coronary sinus. And that's really big compared to the vessels we were looking at before. So that's gonna become a coronary sinus, and then once it's um, into the coronary sinus, then it's gonna dump all the blood into the right atrium. So this is the posterior side of the heart because the apex here is pointing to the apex here is pointing to the opposite direction here now, and it's if you remember from the anterior view, the apex was pointing in this direction. This is the posterior view. So the pulmonary trunk, we don't see that in the posterior view. We don't see the auricles. So what we see is a coronary sinus, which is where all the coronary veins, cardiac veins are going to merge. They're going to take the deoxygenated blood, and you see their blue veins. They're moving in this direction, uh, versus uh, the red ones are down here, which has the oxygenated blood. So this is going to dump all of it into the right atrium. Coronary sinus dumps into right atrium where the blood from the vena cava is coming from. And this is another structure that you need to memorize in addition to right and left coronary arteries. So the coronary sinus and the cardiac veins. Okay, blockage. So how do we block it? Well, it could be due to genetics. There's nothing you can do about that. But if you have a family history of this, and even if you have a super healthy lifestyle, it might just be inevitable. But definitely doing exercise and eating healthy will um, you know, kind of help you out for some time or with some issues. So with genetics, one of the things that can happen, it can, cause something called arteriosclerosis. And also, if you have poor diet, you eat lots of saturated fats, like being shown here. And then this type of things can cause coronary heart disease, where fatty materials called plaques, or fatty materials called plaques, they can clog up the arteries. Which arteries? So these guys, the coronary arteries. And once these are clogged up, then the heart is not getting the blood supply. So it doesn't take much to clog them up. So basically what's happening is if you're eating saturated fats, you have cholesterol. Cholesterol likely to build up inside of the arteries. The arteries, they have thick muscle wall, and these plaques, they can stick onto them. So when you stick onto them, eventually they're going to get bigger and bigger. And imagine this way, like maybe plumbing in your house, and you had this rust ball growing in there, and it gets bigger and bigger, and then it starts clogging up your pipes, even until eventually it's going to stop the water from flowing through there. So once you stop the blood from flowing through there, it's going to be a heart attack. You're going to starve your heart from oxygen and your heart muscle, and your heart's going to stop, and it's one of the leading causes of death in the United States. And reason for that is because we have this fast food available, which is very unhealthy. So you go to these places, and they have this food that can eventually, give heart attacks. So I don't know, maybe you heard about this place. This is I think called Heart Attack Grill. I think it's in Las Vegas, and it's a restaurant. It's called a Heart Attack Grill, and this is, a burger they give out. They'll give you a hospital gown. You sit there, the servers will come by with some melted butter in the syringe, and they'll squirt the butter into your mouth as a shot. So they're basically making fun of this whole idea here, but it's really kind of sad, actually. because they have a mascot, and the mascot is a really big fat guy, and they've had many mascots since and the very beginning, because all of them have died so far. So who wants to be a mascot? Well, you get to eat free there, so that's why they keep getting new people. But there's a lot of saturated fat there. So this coronary heart disease is when you get this plaque. So that's showing a plaque buildup in the artery. It blocks the blood flow. And for some reason, for some strange reason, they're likely to attach onto the muscle wall of the arteries. And the veins, even though the blood is flowing much slower in the veins, they tend not to have plaque in the veins, only in the arteries. So once this builds up, arteries, this builds up in the arteries, it can break off. So it can break off and go into other places, like coronary artery in the brain, and create a stroke or something like that. So they might just stay there and they clog it up, and they clog it up to prevent blood flow going past the point, and that's basically something that can create lots of problems. This is showing a coronary artery here, zoomed in. So what's the solution to this? I'm going to give you two. There are probably more, but these are two. One of them is called a bypass. So coronary bypass, and the other one is called the stent. So coronary bypass is just like if you are on a freeway, you're driving on a freeway, all of a sudden you see Google Maps, it's all red, maybe there's traffic. What you want to do is you want to get off the freeway, and because it's all clogged up with traffic, and you want to get off the freeway, go on the side street, and go back on the freeway somewhere else. So that's what's happening here. You either go into your leg, you seal a blood vessel that's like not important, and then you go take the blood vessel and you can sew it up here, or you can go to your shoulder and there's some extra blood vessels there. You can seal some of them from there, and then they patch them up. They patch you up with those blood vessels, creating a bypass. So they sew it on top of the blood vessels here, and they create a bypass. So what that's going to go ahead and do is it's going to bypass the clot and then continue to feed the muscle of the heart. And that's how bypasses work. Now, maybe you haven't heard of too many single bypasses. You probably have only heard about triple bypasses or quadruple bypasses, and that's having 3 or 4 of these in the heart. And why is that? Because having the heart surgery sometimes might be more dangerous than living with a single clot or a double clot. But if you get to a point where you have triple clots or quadruple clots, then your chances of surviving are going to be lower than the chances of dying from an open heart surgery. So you usually have to wait. Once it becomes very severe, then you go ahead and get these bypasses. The other remedy is the stents. So stents are used to keep the arteries unobstructed or open. And so it keeps the whole thing from closing up. So when you get a ear pierced, maybe they had to put something there to keep the hole from closing up. So that's a stent. So over here, what you have is you have a clot. You can see there's a clot. And what you do is you take this, and I think you do an ultrasound, see what's going on. And then let me show you this another picture, and I'll go back. And then what you do is you get this long wire. They get this long wire, and then um, and at the end of this long wire, you have this balloon, but the balloon is empty. So you have this balloon, and the balloon is empty. You go over to the leg, and then you watch this thing happening on the computer monitor. You snake the wire up until you find where the blood clot is. Once you snake this up, then you find the blood clot. Then you go past the blood clot, going back here. And imagine this is a long wire that was snaked up the leg, and now you found the blood clot or the plaque. And you have this wire that has a balloon on it. And then you go past the blood clot. The surgeon at the other end has a button they can push. Once they push the button on the wire, it's going to push air into the balloon. When you push air into the balloon, there's this little bit of mesh here that you can see. And the mesh is going to push on the sides of the clot to open that coronary artery. And that's how it's going to keep the blood vessel open, so you don't die from a heart attack. So this mesh is going to stay and they take the wire out basically, and that keeps the artery open. So that's how they are using the stents to keep the arteries open. This is called coronary angioplasty. A lot of famous people, celebrities, they have had this happen. So Larry King had happened to Bill Clinton. So they would have, otherwise they would have to die much earlier. So Bill Clinton, he would have died much earlier if this intervention didn't happen. So this could be due to genetics, but it can also be due to lifestyle. So I would say exercise, eat right, don't go for saturated fats or vegetable oils. And what exercise does, it pumps your blood, and when you pump your blood, it blows stuff off. So it blows all the plaque off, kind of cleans it up. So that's so it helps with these plaques. If you don't exercise, you have a sedentary lifestyle, you're more prone to this kind of stuff. So this happened to Bill Clinton. Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle. We talked about the conduction system earlier. Do not confuse the conduction system with the cardiac cycle. It's not the same thing. So when I talked about, the SA node, sinoatrial node, AV node, the electrochemical conduction system, that's the conduction system. And now we're talking about the cardiac cycle. And this is what order the chambers are contracting in. So they have to contract in certain order for the blood to go in the right direction. So what do I mean by that? So let's pretend that this is going to be your atrium and your ventricles. So if they were to contract at the same time, top one down and then the bottom one, the bottom ones, if they contract at the same time as the top ones, they might want to push the blood back up, and then nothing's going to happen because they're contracting all at the same time. So you need to have one contraction at a time for the atria to contract first so they can push the blood down, and after that the other one, the ventricles contract, and that's what the cardiac cycle is. So pressure within the heart forces the valves to either open or close. So let's go ahead and look at this. Before we talk about this, let's define two words. One is systole. Systole, you may have heard about this. The other one is diastole. And dystole is contraction of the heart chamber, whereas the diastole is when you have your, when you get your blood pressure checked, they put the blood pressure cuff on you, they give you a reading. These two numbers are the ones they're representing systole and diastole. So systole is contraction of the heart chamber, diastole is the relaxation of the heart chamber. And atria, in this one, atria has contracted, and that's going to be atrial systole. If the ventricles have contracted, that's going to be ventricular systole. Same thing for diastole. If the atria relaxes, atrial diastole, and then if the ventricles relaxes, ventricle diastole. So that's how it works. So first you have to have atria systole, and then at the same time you have the ventricles diastole, and then it's flipped, it's opposite. So then you have atrial diastole and ventricular systole. So they are sending the blood to the systemic circuit, and then basically they're sending blood. Let me show you another picture here. So these are sending blood up. This is sending it to the lungs first, and then this one sends it to the systemic circuit. Okay, so to receive that blood, what needs to happen? First, atria systole and then ventricular diastole, then it's the reverse, atria diastole and ventricular systole, and then both of them are relaxed. And then this thing is going to repeat itself until you die. So let's take a look at it using little animation. And the first step is going to be atria systole. So that's the animation. I'm going to give you a second to look at it. So you see the first thing that happens on top, they both contract, the atria contract. Top two contract and the bottom two are relaxed. and then the bottom two contract. So they relax, they wait for it to fill up, and then the bottom two contract, they send the blood away, and then this thing happens with all the four chambers, they relax in order for the blood to refill. So that's going to be the cardiac cycle. You do need to remember that. Please do not confuse this with the conduction system. The conduction system is when we talked about the SA node, the AV node. Cardiac cycle is referring to the contraction of the chambers. So that's going to be the cardiac cycle. So this is going to be a pretty short lecture for the heart. So let's go ahead and finish this up with the heart sounds. So when you go ahead and put your head on somebody's chest or you use a stethoscope, you can hear these lub-dub sounds. And this is a sound of a healthy heart. And we describe the sound as being lub-dub sound. So this refers or corresponds to the AV valves closing, and then AV valves close and tricuspid valve or bicuspid valve, they close. So that's where the sound is coming from. So then the other chambers take over the pulmonary and the aortic valves closing, and they cause the dub sound. So lub dub, lub dub. So I just went ahead and Googled the sounds of the heart, and I'm going to go ahead and share the sound. Hopefully it'll play for you. And if you're wearing headphones right now, maybe you want to lower the volume in case this is too loud for you. So adjust your volume to the accordance, whatever you need. And I'm gonna play the normal heart sound first. That's the normal heart sound. So that's an AV valves closing, and then the pulmonary and the um, tricuspid valves are also closing. So that's the sound. And then AV valves closing is lub sound, pulmonary aortic valves are closing is the dub sound. And then earlier in the last video, I mentioned heart murmurs. So these things are called heart murmurs, and heart murmurs basically caused by your leaky valves, cause turbulence in the heart fluid, often resulting from leaky valves. And this is called turbulence. Turbulence make a weird murmur sound. And we said that if you have atrial septic defect, then you might have, a heart murmur. So I'll be switching back and forth here, going into the sounds and to the slides. So pulmonary valve, if that's going to have a murmur here, pulmonary valve, then um, you might have a stenosis, pulmonary stenosis. That's going to be thickening of the pulmonary valve. And let's see if we can find the one with pulmonary valve. That's pulmonary stenosis. So I'm going to play that. So that's what that's going to sound like. You could compare that to the healthy heart. So now you heard the difference between the two. And if you have maybe mitral regurgitation, that's what that's going to sound like. So that's maybe something wrong with the mitral valve. So when there's something wrong with the mitral valve, maybe the blood can go backwards, and that's what it's going to sound like. It's going to sound different than the normal heart sound. And then let's see if we also have mitral stenosis. Oh, that's there. So this one sounds completely different. So technician will hear it and probably know, but they will, they can diagnose for you. But if they can't, then maybe they'll have to wait for the cardiologist. So that's the atrial septic defect, where you got the hole between the right atria and the left atria. That's going to cause sound, a different sound than the normal heart sound. And that can be congenital. Maybe that means you can be born with it. So you have all the other ones. You can kind of maybe hear these if you want to. So so that's different sounds that you can hear. And then sometimes when you go to the dentist, sometimes you can get this bacterial infection in your teeth, and then that can actually make their way down to the valves and cause problems. And the bacteria, they can kind of end up in the valves, can cause damage, and that can potentially kill you. So for that, that can cause also more issues. So, and again, if the foramina ovale or the doesn't close all the way or stays partially open, um, that's also that's something that can cause issues as well. So that's gonna do it for the heart chapter, and and this was pretty short lecture compared to the usual ones, which takes almost hour and a half. So I'm gonna post this. Thank you guys for listening.